The air hung heavy. It was thick with humidity and the stench of napalm. The date was November 16th, 1968. The place just outside Duc Pho, Vietnam. The sun, a searing eye in the sky, had just climbed past the horizon. It was 8 a.m. Another day in hell. For Army Captain Colin Powell, a 31-year-old advisor to the South Vietnamese Army. It was about to become far more infernal. Powell and his team prepared for a routine reconnaissance mission. Their Huey Helicopter, a workhorse of the Vietnam War, sat on the landing pad, its blades slowly churning, chopping at the humid air. The crew, a mix of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits, shuffled their gear, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and dread. They were about to head into the heart of the jungle, a green abyss teeming with unseen dangers. The Huey, its metal skin scarred and scratched, was their chariot into the unknown. Each man carried within him a mix of fear and a steely determination. This was Vietnam. Every mission could be their last. The roar of the Huey's engine deepened. It vibrated through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The smell of aviation fuel, acrid and pungent, filled the air. One by one, the men climbed aboard. Powell, his face a mask of concentration, settled into his seat. He adjusted his helmet, the familiar weight reassuring. The Huey lifted, a lumbering beast clawing its way into the sky. Inside, the noise was deafening. The men shouted to be heard above the din. The jungle below spread out, a tapestry of emerald green, cut by the brown ribbon of a muddy river. Powell felt the familiar lurch in his stomach as the helicopter gained altitude. He scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of danger. Tension crackled in the air, thick and heavy. Each man was acutely aware of the risks. They were flying low, vulnerable to enemy fire from the dense jungle below. Yet, there was a grim determination etched on their faces. They had a job to do. They flew low over the jungle canopy, the Huey struggling to maintain altitude. The air grew hotter, thick with the scent of rotting vegetation. The jungle below was a treacherous maze. Razorback Ridge loomed ahead, a jagged scar on the landscape. Powell, his eyes glued to the terrain below, knew they were approaching a particularly dangerous area. The helicopter dipped low, hugging the contours of the terrain. Powell felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving the jungle below. They were flying blind, relying on instinct and luck. The jungle hid the enemy well. The Huey lurched violently. Powell gripped his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then died. A deathly silence descended upon them, broken only by the whirring of the dying engine. They were going down. Panic surged through the helicopter. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the roar of the engine. The Huey, no longer a mechanical bird, became a metal coffin plummeting towards the unforgiving jungle. Powell felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. He knew he had seconds to react. "Brace for impact!" he roared, his voice barely audible above the wind screaming past the open doors. The world outside became a blur of green and brown. Trees rushed towards them with terrifying speed. The Huey, out of control, spun wildly as it fell. Powell, his body slammed against the side of the helicopter, fought to maintain his senses. He knew a crash was inevitable. He could only hope to survive it. The Huey slammed into the jungle floor. The impact ripped through the metal frame with a deafening screech. The world became a chaotic jumble of noise, pain, and disorientation. Powell was thrown violently against his restraints. He felt a sharp pain shoot through his ankle. He was dazed but alive. Smoke filled the cabin, thick and acrid. Powell coughed, his lungs burning. He fumbled for his harness release, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get out. The helicopter could explode at any moment. He looked around, his vision blurry. The other men were slumped in their seats, some groaning, others ominously still. The smell of aviation fuel and burning metal filled the air. The heat was intense. Flames licked at the wreckage, hungry and unforgiving. Powell knew he had to act fast. His comrades were injured, trapped. He was their only hope. Ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, Powell kicked open the jammed door. Heat and smoke billowed into the cabin. He coughed, his eyes stinging. He crawled through the wreckage, his ears ringing, his body a symphony of pain. He reached the first man, the crew chief, slumped unconscious over the controls. Powell checked for a pulse, his fingers finding a faint throb. Relief washed over him. He was alive. Working quickly, he unbuckled the man's harness and dragged him out of the wreckage. He pulled him away from the burning helicopter, laying him gently on the jungle floor. He looked back. The fire was growing, fueled by the spilled fuel. 3 more men were trapped inside the inferno. Powell knew he had to move fast. He plunged back into the wreckage, ignoring the searing heat and choking smoke. Each rescue was a desperate struggle against time and the growing inferno. He dragged his comrades to safety, one by one, his own pain forgotten in the face of their peril. Finally, only one man remained. He was pinned beneath a tangle of twisted metal, his cries for help barely audible above the roar of the flames. Powell fought his way back into the inferno. The heat was unbearable, the smoke blinding. He found the man, his face contorted in pain. Powell, his body screaming in protest, strained against the wreckage. He managed to free the trapped soldier just as the flames reached their peak. He pulled him clear, shielding him with his own body as a wall of fire erupted from the wreckage. They lay there for a moment, gasping for air, the heat scorching their skin. Powell, despite his own injuries, had pulled all 4 men from the inferno. He had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. His actions that day would earn him the Bronze Star, a testament to his courage and unwavering commitment to his men. But more importantly, it would cement his reputation as a true leader, a man who never hesitated to put the lives of others before his own.